AMD opens up for OpenAI. Qualcomm disarms ARM. Data centers in space. Qualcomm picks up a new hobby. Robot keep away. Is Veeam buying security? And we're going to look at the latest threat to secure enclaves in this week's episode of the Tech Field Day Rundown. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tech Field Day Rundown. It is October the 8th, and we are back once again with some more exciting news from the world of technology. And some other stories, too, because we just couldn't lay off of it. And we hope that you're enjoying National Fluffernutter Day. If you're listening to us in New England, you probably are and are licking your lips. And if you're not, you're wondering what that is. Be very careful when you Google, folks. But someone who does not have to be very careful when he's doing all of that is my co-host, Mr. Alastair Cooke. Al, it's good to see you again.
Nice to be here with you, Tom, and I am always careful what I Google, particularly in a public place. One of the things I did Google today was to make sure that I was correct about pierogi, National Pierogi Day today, my favorite of the Polish dumplings. And it's a long way from Poland here, but we have a Polish community who have made me great dumplings here before.
Well, the good news is that you should button down your pierogies and be ready for news from all across the globe, because we have a lot of great stuff coming your way. Not just on the globe, but around it. However, we are going to start with probably the biggest news story that happened this week, and that comes courtesy of AMD and OpenAI talking about all things AI, because OpenAI announced that they will be deploying 6 gigawatts of AMD GPUs to power their future AI infrastructure. That deployment is going to start with 1 gigawatt of deployed capacity in the second half of 2026 and play out over the next few years. AMD was also quick to offer a warrant for up to 160 million shares of stock to OpenAI that could lead to them having control of up to 10% of AMD if all of those targets are hit for full vestment and they make the parlay with that weird punter-kicker combo. But the question that I have for you, Al, is 6 gigawatts of GPU capacity, are we really measuring that in gigawatts now? Is that going to be enough to move the needle, knowing that we have seen massive investments from companies like NVIDIA?
Yeah, and even directly with OpenAI, NVIDIA's deal with them is larger at 10 gigawatts than this AMD deal. Although, if you look at it relative to market share of GPUs, this is a pretty significant deal. I don't think we would expect AMD to have 60% of the market share that NVIDIA has in GPUs. And so that comparison is an interesting one to see this new growth. I think there's a much wider context here about all of these announcements, and it does feel like we cover this every single episode of the rundown. Somebody is announcing building vast amounts of data center or vast amounts of power generation or acquiring vast amounts of something. It just, I don't know, I'm not sure that it's news anymore, only these numbers are huge. I do wonder whether there's some overlap of the numbers that we're seeing announced, that announcing $10 million of this overlaps with $5 billion of this and $10 trillion. Well, we're getting to, was trillions of dollars worth of spent? Yeah, trillions of dollars worth of AI spent. There must be a bunch of overlapping in here, and there's possibly some interesting accounting just to make sure that there's new announcements. We see this as part of the CoreWeave commitment with OpenAI that we saw. I think we covered that last week or the week before on the rundown. That's a $22 billion worth of commitment. This sits within the wider context of the big Stargate project to bring hundreds of gigawatts of data center power for AI over time. All of these numbers are outstandingly vast, and I really do want to see vast returns on those investments, because there is a huge economic and even environmental impact to all of these build-outs. We better see some benefit to humanity from these build-outs. The other perspective is that these big numbers typically are spread over multiple years. These are not things that are happening this year. As Tom said, the first turn-on for this one is a mere 1 gigawatt worth of GPUs that'll happen sometime in the second half of next year. For context, there's a ridiculously large amount of power being used by these GPUs and these racks. And so we are seeing 200 kilowatt racks as being the sort of power density. And so by the time you've got a 200 kilowatt rack, 1 gigawatt is 5 racks. Is that megawatts? No, it's 5,000. Sorry, that was, I missed the, megawatts in between. 5 racks is a megawatt, so to get to a gigawatt, it's 5,000 racks. Yeah, okay, that's a pretty big environment. It's, multiple data center rooms. Conclusion on this, there's a lot of money being spent on AI. It continues to be being spent on AI. People who are betting on this believe we're still very early in generative AI and that the technology path we're following will continue to require vast numbers of GPUs, vast amounts of compute. Personally, I hope we see some innovation that reduces that demand over time. We've covered the ins and outs of the legal case between ARM and Qualcomm for a while. This has been a pretty slow-moving case of law, driven by Qualcomm buying Nuvia, and rather than continuing with their own licensing for the ARM CPUs, they took over the Nuvia licensing. A move that ARM says is actually invalid, and that ARM wants Qualcomm to renegotiate their original deal. Judge in Delaware has said Qualcomm did not breach the terms and that therefore the license through Nuvia was valid and owned now by Qualcomm. ARM, of course, says we're going to appeal this, and that the contract with Nuvia ceased to be valid as soon as they were acquired by Qualcomm. Does this sound like a benefit for consumers anywhere, or is this just your usual legal wrangling over contracts between two vendors?
I think part of it is legal wrangling. I mean, there's only so much that you can wrangle on these things. I think what is lining up, though, is that the judge is really taking a microscope to this, licensing agreement and saying, why do you think that this violated the terms when this acquisition happened? Because that's not what I'm seeing here. And it comes back to that idea that we've seen a lot in the industry of, if you buy a piece of equipment or buy a piece of software, is there an implied warranty or a user agreement that goes along with that? The manufacturers will tell you no, because they want to get double. They want to get what the original company paid for it, and then they want to get what you paid for it. So if you've ever tried to buy like a secondhand device on the internet or something like that, and then wanted to update it to the latest software and been told, oh, no, you need a new support agreement with us because whatever support agreement they had is no longer valid, you'll kind of know what this means. And of course, if you read the agreements that those devices come with, they're very specific about everything in there, how these are not transferable, how this stuff doesn't work. And some of those clauses have been ruled invalid by courts. And what we're seeing here is that a judge in Delaware took a real close look at this particular thing and said, well, why wouldn't the rule that Nuvia had with ARM not apply to the company that bought them? And Qualcomm tried to argue in court, well, yeah, that's exactly what we're thinking, is that when we bought them, whatever their terms were became part of our terms. And ARM is like, but no, that's a completely different thing, and they're going to have to renegotiate with us. And I'm sure there was going to be an additional dollar amount involved in there, because that's what this really comes down to. This has nothing to do with whether or not Qualcomm is allowed to incorporate Nuvia's data center technology into, admittedly, a lot of things that are going to be sent out to the customers out there. They're the new Qualcomm ARM processors that are going into these Windows AI PCs. That's where a lot of that Nuvia technology landed. The problem is that ARM wants to get paid by Qualcomm for all of that new stuff that they're developing. And if you read between the lines, which is one of the other things that this story is so fascinating about, you'll recall that one of the companies that came out against NVIDIA buying ARM was Qualcomm, because they didn't want this to kind of line up to be like a massive situation where NVIDIA would have basically kind of dictated how Qualcomm's business would have run. I think NVIDIA did okay for itself after missing out on that, but I think ARM is still a little mad at them. And so this is like the whole, well, I can't legally cancel your license, but boy, I can make it miserable on you for weeks and months and years and make you jump through every little hoop. And the judge, who already smacked the company down in December of last year, is basically saying, guess what, guys? really stop it. So I feel like there's going to be some rounds of appeals. Some people are going to take a look at this. There'll be some more back and forth. But ultimately, I think Qualcomm's probably going to come out of this smelling like a rose, which is really honestly the best thing for consumers. Bookstore Lex Luthor lookalike Jeff Bezos has suggested that he wants to put data centers in the one place uncorrupted by capitalism: space. Thank you, Tim Curry. Bezos says that within the next 20 years, he expects to build gigawatt data centers in orbit that will be operated by solar energy. Somehow, though, they can't operate them on planet Earth with solar energy. Now, I'm going to toss this over to the real scientists in the room who have pointed out a couple of important things. One, the massive amount of heat that's generated by your average data center is a lot harder to radiate in space, even if you have all of the copper left in the world. And all of those components that are going to be in those orbital data centers are going to have to be shielded twice as much, because it turns out that those cosmic rays that cause bit flips randomly on Earth, when you don't have an ozone layer to block those, they're 3 times as bad, or more, depending on which math you look at. I'm sure that Bezos remains undeterred by all of this news, since this project will finally give him a new base of operations against Larry Ellison's Volcano Island fortress. But Alastair, I guess my question to you is, are you ready to get a contract to launch yourself into orbit to build a data center? And what happens if you forget the rack studs back on Earth?
Well, I think there's a really important aspect to this, which is to understand that Jeff Bezos is sending things into space all the time, and if it's not rock stars, it might as well be data centers. The challenge, of course, is that these data centers should stay in space for more than 5 minutes, and that's a little bit more than he has yet achieved with his space ambitions. Stepping back a little bit, motivation here is that when you look at solar radiation, about 90% of the energy of solar radiation is absorbed by the Earth's atmosphere. That means that in terms of the solar array required, if you put the solar array in space, it only needs to be 1/10 of the size of the solar array on Earth. That's kind of some of the maybe logic that's not really working here. Because as you say, Tom, that solar radiation isn't just the good kind, it's also the not so good kind that damages circuitry. Some of the HPE experiments have seen that in relatively short periods of time and space, under 2 years, over half of the SSDs that HPE shipped up into space had problems, and that's really going to be a little bit of a challenge, because by the time you add enough redundancy to cope with that, you're adding more mass. And have you really saved energy if you have to use heavier lift than even the SpaceX Mars heavy lift? If you have to use as yet unseen heavy lift to get these things into space, are you actually using less energy than if you simply left them on the Earth? Yeah, Uncle Jeff, as we like to call Jeff Bezos, is saying that this is at least 10 years away, and probably less than 20. Yeah, predictions about the future are particularly tough. I don't see changes in the basic physics here of heavy lift versus the energy that you're saving by heavy lifting being beneficial. Maybe there's something around being in low Earth orbit and leveraging technology like Starlink to get this as being the biggest edge compute deployment. But if it happens, I will be absolutely stunned, although, unlike Peter Beck, I will not commit to eating my hat if this heavy lift happens. Peter Beck, of course, is Rocket Lab's my fellow countryman, spaceman. It's time to break out your breadboards. Gee, I've got a big pile of breadboards just over there, as well as some Arduinos, because Arduino is going to be part of Qualcomm, or at least is going to be owned by Qualcomm. They promise that Arduino will still be operated independently. The acquisition, of course, was announced in the home of Arduino, Turin in Italy, along with a new board, the Uno Q. The Uno Q is maybe a competitor to a Raspberry Pi that runs a real Debian, not a fork. Qualcomm says the move is an exciting way to get into the developer community to augment its business-to-business focused chipset development. The Uno Q uses the new Dragon Wing QRB 2210 chip, along with a microcontroller on the back. So that combination of high compute power, probably with some AI chops in that Dragon Wing, along with a lot of real-time interaction through that microcontroller. It looks to be an ARM-based microcontroller. Interesting to see that combination together on a board, and interesting to see that as both a standalone computer and a development machine. Tom, are you going to trade in your laptop for an Uno Q?
Probably not yet, mostly because it doesn't come with a monitor. But I think it's interesting that Qualcomm basically kind of jumped right in here with both feet and admitted why they needed to pick this up is because nobody buys Qualcomm equipment to develop on unless you're doing stuff directly for Qualcomm. And we've seen this for years, right? Like I still have a pile of Raspberry Pis sitting in the corner doing very random things. Like I think one of them is an emulation machine and there's some other stuff. But it was really cheap to get into developing for ARM microprocessors by doing that, right? What was it? $30-$40 US. And that meant that a lot of people were writing software to run on Raspberry Pis. But as you mentioned, Raspberry OS is not Debian. It's a custom version of Debian because it's optimized to run on Pis. And so Qualcomm was like, well, on the one hand, we've got people who really should be developing for our platform. And on the other hand, we've got this really successful group of small device manufacturers who are trying to effectively create this marketing arm, if you will. So how can we do that? And when you're Qualcomm, the answer is, I don't know what's for sale. And so they did. They picked up Arduino and they basically said, we're going to keep it independent. We're not going to stick our fingers in it too deep. And we're going to come out with new hardware, right? The smart thing to do probably would have been to partner with Arduino first to see if people were actually going to buy the Uno Q. I don't know if they will or not, but I mean, ultimately, this can't hurt Qualcomm because if you can start putting Qualcomm Dragon Wing, Snapdragon, Snapwing, Dart Wing Duck stuff into the community, then what you're going to get is people who stop writing code that runs specifically on Pis and starts running it on the Uno Q. And by the way, shout out to them for not making this thing $100. The price points on these things are actually reasonable. You can get like I think it was the 16 gig version is available today. The 32 gig version, or 8 and 16, I forget which one it is. But there's a small one you can buy today, and there's a little one that you can buy soon. That is a great way to get people to start writing. And more importantly, the microcontroller aspect of it is directly aimed at the Raspberry Pi people because having the way that the microcontroller works on some of those boxes is basically saying you can swap these things in and start developing for us. And then later, when you want to graduate using big boy stuff, well, it's still just Qualcomm chipsets under the hood, so you can already run that. And are you comfortable developing on Debian? Then great, we run Debian, not some customized version. And I think it's a win ultimately for Qualcomm, provided there's a little asterisk there, provided they really do keep their hands off of Arduino. Because one of the things that we've learned over the years about the hobbyist and development community is if a big corporate entity jumps in and tries to basically impose their will, we are going to see people defecting away from Arduino as fast as possible. And they've already had their own challenges over the last few years. It was things as simple as who owns the trademark for the name. So the community's already kind of a little bit wary of what could happen here. But I'm hoping for the best at this point. All right, keep your distance, Chewy. Just don't look like you're trying to keep your distance. And that is according to Rodney Brooks. And you may know the name because he's the founder of iRobot and an MIT professor emeritus. He says that people should stay 3 meters away from any of those modern bipedal robots that you see out walking around. You're probably asking yourself, well, Tom, why should regular people stay 354 barleycorns away from these walking terminators? Well, that's because of physics. And our friend Mr. Brooks says that modern robots are expending so much energy trying to stay upright and stable that any catastrophic failure of those balance systems are going to force the energy to be expelled somewhere. Remember, folks, physics is a harsh mistress, so that means that energy is probably going to go somewhere into the nearest pedestrian. Brooks goes on to say that current robots cannot develop enough dexterity through vision only AI systems. They're going to need access to other data, such as touch. Now, I will say, though, that in the article, there was no mention of the minimum safe distance that you need to stay away from your robot vacuum. But, Al, do you think that it's probably a good idea to stay away from anything looking for Sarah Connor on the street?
Well, depends what your name is. If your name is Sarah Connor, then definitely stay away from whichever kind of walking full-size humanoid things are out there, particularly battery-powered mechanical things that maybe can't feel. Both can't feel physically, but also can't feel emotionally. There's some interesting challenges in here, some thoughts around this. One of the elements is that we kind of like our robots to be actually androids, things that look like humans, have human form. Yet there are more efficient ways to move around. I was reading about putting robots into hospitals. Well, hospitals are designed to have things that roll, so there's no need for your service robot in a hospital to have legs. And therefore, you can get a lot more stability because there never needs to be the ability to manage a single point of contact with the ground. And I think this is kind of where Rodney Brooks' argument comes in from and why he's not afraid of his robot vacuum, because it's not standing 6 foot tall on legs with maybe 200 pounds, maybe 400 pounds of total mass. I haven't looked at what these things weigh now, but I imagine they weigh a little more than I do. His concern is that when things go wrong, they go wrong in a catastrophic way, and that kind of was borne out by his early experience of being a little too close to a humanoid robot when it did experience a failure and went down. He's still alive, so it wasn't too catastrophic, but I'm not sure I'd want to take those risks too. For context, this is 3 meters, that's 10 of your imperial feet, or just over 3 yards, or as you say, what was it, 480 barleycorns? Um, Stay far enough away that when it falls down, the bits of fragment that go flying outwards don't hit you, or if its arm goes up in the air as it's going down, don't get slapped by it, was the suggestion. And really, you come back to, why do these things need to have 2 legs? Why can they not move in a different form? And why do the 2 legs need to be placed in the same way that humans are? Uh, these robots would probably be more stable if they had 3 legs. But just how far across the uncanny valley would we be if these things with human voices and arms walked around on 3 legs, or even possibly 4, so that there was always 3 in contact with the ground for stability? All of these things would make these robots easier to design, easier to operate, and consume less power, but they don't look quite as human. I'm not sure if I need them to look human. Maybe I'm happier if they're safer to be around, and maybe the kind of blocky things that we've seen in the past might be a better move than some of the things we're seeing from companies like Elon Musk plans to have these blank-faced humanoid robots serving us our drinks. I'll give them some space. Veeam's ready to make a big splash in the data security posture management DSPM arena. Reports say that they might be willing to pay up to $1.8 billion for security with an eye. Well, with 2 eyes, in fact. This would help them compete with Rubrik and Cohesity more directly. Backup companies getting into security, data protection. DSPM is a big driver for security teams right now, particularly looking to manage the security of data that's being used by AI applications. Veeam, of course, having moved into private equity, has been making a bunch of acquisitions, particularly picking up the ransomware negotiations group Coveware, not CoreWeave. Ransomware negotiation group Coveware. I've got that wrong yet again. I'm tripping over all sorts of things. This could be another in a recent spate of acquisitions from Veeam, with the most recently picked up ransomware negotiation group Coveware. Tom, is this shifting Veeam from, well, my kind of data center infrastructure world into your security world? Is this significant for Veeam?
It is, and we heard from Veeam at Security Field Day 13 earlier this year. Rick Vanover and Emily did a great job of kind of presenting about Coveware. But if you look at where companies are now it's not about those things. It's about creating a holistic view of security and in what you said, data protection. And one of the pieces that Cohesity has had for a while that Rubrik is working on, that Veeam is in need of development, is data security posture management. And essentially, what that is going through your organization and finding out where all your data is and figuring out how to classify it so you can assign risk levels to it. But there's a lot of other benefits. And one of those is that if you properly classify data, and I'm not talking about like government classification where it's like, secret, top secret, and I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. This is about, how sensitive is this? What is a risk factor associated with it? That's super valuable for AI, right? Because when you look at the way that we're using AI to do these kinds of things right now, there might be some stuff that you really don't want to have included in your algorithms. And being able to classify that and provide a posture to it and say, okay, anything that's classified as, label X, never included in the algorithm, is going to be super valuable. And companies are going to be looking for, I'm sorry, customers are going to be looking for companies that touch that data. Are you going to go download a tool that does that? Or are you going to rely on the company that already does look at all of your data, which would be your disaster recovery data protection company? I know which one I would rather give permissions to do that. And so this is Veeam basically looking through the whole market and saying, this is an area that has a lot of synergy with what we're doing, which means we need to be in it. And in order for us to do that, we need to acquire a company that's already kind of a leader in that space. And this goes back to the comment that you made that, about 5 years ago, Veeam got bought out by private equity. And I don't think I'm preaching to the choir here when I say that the way that private equity solves problems is with a checkbook. They're not going to look to develop this technology in-house. Or if they did, eventually they'll hit a point where the return isn't worth what they're spending on it. So the next thing they're going to do is they're going to go out and buy somebody. Now, again, this is not a done deal. This isn't even an announced deal. This is a rumor that this could potentially happen. But one of the things that I love about these kinds of rumors is that sometimes they are trial balloons. Because if the entire industry starts nodding their head and looking around and going, yeah, that would be a good pickup for a company like Veeam. That's basically Veeam getting market validation and in some ways causing valuations to rise. I'd say stock price to go up, but we know that's not the case. But if the industry as a whole says this is a good move, I think that's something that they're going to want to go with.
It's now time for a closer look. Security researchers have figured out how to break enclaves. Hmm, sort of, in theory, in papers published by two independent groups, using the latest exploits. Now, security enclaves is a way of keeping secret data secret inside your application, secret even from the underlying platform, and encrypting data at rest. Both of these attacks, called Battering RAM and Wiretap, work by installing an interposer between the RAM and the actual system and capturing the data and replaying it later on. You need a specific hardware device. You need a specific application, usually a virtual machine, to do that replay at the particular location. Tom, does this mean that trusted enclaves, where we put our most secure of secure data, aren't secure anymore?
It depends on how you look at it. So here's the thing, like this was a big story, right? Oh man, secure enclaves can totally be hacked. And then you dig into it and you realize you had a long way to go from the TPM chip in my iPhone being safe enough for me to unlock it with my face to like levels of like, SHA-1 or MD5 hashes being broken. So first of all, you have to understand that both of the secure enclave compute mechanisms, Intel calls theirs SGX, and AMD has one they call SEV-SNP, SNP, not SNMP. That's a different thing. They both use something called deterministic encryption to store data in RAM. What does that mean? That means that if I encrypt data on one side and transport it to the other side, the ciphertext is always the same, right? So like, think of something as simple as a ROT13 cipher. Whenever I encrypt it over here, whatever shows up over here with the same key is going to look the same. But you're going to say to yourself, that's exactly how data is supposed to work, right? When you encrypt it, if you jumble it in encryption in the transport, it's not going to come out looking the same. The reason why they did this is for performance reasons. And the researcher who did some of the initial work, I believe it was on battering RAM, said this. He said that originally Intel allowed SGX to run on consumer processors and enterprise processors. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, they said, we're not going to let it run on consumer processors anymore because they were RAM limited to around 256 gigs of RAM. Whereas on an enterprise, Xeon thing, we can throw a RAM at it until it falls through the core of the earth. But the catch is that in order to scale performance to that level, they had to use deterministic encryption. You can use non-deterministic encryption, but it does incur a performance penalty. And now being able to use non-deterministic encryption would invalidate this attack completely, because you can't replay non-deterministic encryption because the ciphertext is different every time you use it. That's the mechanical thing. Let's talk about the physicals part. So in order for this to work, you have to have physical access to the hardware device, and you have to install something in the system called an interposer that literally sits between the RAM and the CPU, and it intercepts all of the processing that is sent to RAM. Then you have to watch a specific memory address for ciphertext, and then you can decrypt and replay. Problem: you have to have physical access to the device, right? And I will recall one of my favorite Microsoft quotes of all time, where if you pop a Windows XP, or if you pop a Windows 2000 server CD into a Windows 2003 server and boot it, you get unfettered administrator access to the recovery console. And Microsoft's response when this bug was filed was, if you don't have physical access to the box, you don't own the box. They do. So I could see possibly that a supply chain attack could cause an interposer to get put in there. But that's an awful risk, folks. Like, you've got to be targeted in order for this to happen. So you need to have an interposer. It relies on the fact that SGX is doing this for performance issues, and really all they need to do is turn on non-deterministic encryption, and this whole thing goes away. And battering RAM works on AMD and Intel. Wiretap only works on Intel. It is very specific to using Intel SGX. I don't want to say there's nothing going on here, because obviously this is like Spectre and Meltdown, right? At first we're like, oh yeah, pipeline branch execution prediction, that's a problem. And it ended up being something that caused a lot of problems. But the last I checked, I didn't recall anybody using Meltdown to steal my credit card data. I mean, Al, do you think that having physical access to the box is a bigger problem than putting an interposer in there to possibly intercept ciphertext in an encrypted enclave?
Well, if these encrypted enclaves were on people's laptops, I would absolutely be concerned. Laptops and desktops, I'd be concerned about this, because physical access is much easier to achieve with a relatively portable device. Physical access into a cloud provider's data center or an enterprise data center that should have good physical security, because without physical security, you have no security. That's less of a concern for me. In terms of the viability of a supply chain attack, to put an interposer into every single motherboard, because this would happen either at the motherboard level or potentially inside the actual DIMM that is being installed in these servers. Yeah, that's not a credible thing, but if there's enough to be gained, a nation-state actor might achieve this. We'd never hear if they did, because anybody who knew about it and leaked the information would be unalived. So in terms of the likelihood of this occurring, my credit card details being stolen this way, I don't see that as particularly likely. The kind of crown jewels that would be attacked this way would be designs for nuclear deterrent submarines, or those kinds of central banking records that are stored on these secure enclaves. But these secure enclaves are just another layer of the security onion. They do not stand alone. They start with physical security, start with single tenancy, because part of the replay is that you need to be replaying at the same memory address in order to be able to decrypt that data. So there's a collection of circumstances that good security practices will allow you to mitigate any risk that is here. And that's always the reality of a security situation, is that you look at what the risks are, you mitigate the credible risks and the cost-effective risks to mitigate that are less credible. This is probably a risk that is fairly well protected by the majority of organizations that are using trusted enclaves. This isn't to say people that are bad at IT are not using trusted enclaves. It's just that, well, if you're bad at IT in general, you can be bad at IT with a trusted enclave and pay a lot more for it. Uh, yeah, that's the reality of the world we live in. Is that any large, valuable target is going to be attacked in multiple ways, and this is just another potential way. We are a little way away from it being a real danger to causing real problems in organizations right now.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Your bank account information is not very important, but 100 people's bank account information is pretty critical. Or the encrypted wire transfer data that you could then substitute your own account information in there. That's valuable. So I'm going to wait with cautious bated breath to see exactly how this plays out. But for now, it's a neat proof of concept, and apparently you can build a wiretap uh, system for less than $50. So who knows? But I can tell you something that's way less than $50. It's free. And that's the upcoming field day events that we have going on. I have one going on tomorrow, starting at 7 a.m. Pacific. We're going to be hearing from our friends over at Microsoft. We're going to be talking about Microsoft security and specifically Microsoft Sentinel. You probably saw last week they had some big news come out around Microsoft Sentinel, how it's evolving, some of the cool stuff they're adding into it, like MCP server and a data lake. Well, if those are things that are interesting to you, make sure you tune in. Like I said, Thursday, October the 9th, that's tomorrow. And we're going to have some great conversations with some of their executives like Scott Woodgate. We're also going to be getting some demos, and we're even going to hold a roundtable. So that should be real exciting. And then next week, we're going to be out in Vegas, or at least Foskett is, because he's going to be at NetApp Insight, which I believe is one of 3 or 4 shows that are going on in Vegas at the same time. It's like they're trying to pack them in before Thanksgiving or some big thing that's happening in Vegas after Thanksgiving. Whatever it is, make sure you tune in on October the 15th because Stephen is going to have some great presentations. It's going to be a really exciting time. I'm sure he will have a joke or two about Vegas. You never know. But after that, Al, you're back with more great stuff, not in Vegas.
Not in Vegas. I will be in San Francisco, in glorious San Francisco for Cloud Field Day, October 22nd and 23rd. We have a great lineup of presenting companies. We're returning to Oxide Computing, and we'll hear from Pure Storage and a couple of other great companies and a great collection of delegates as well joining me out. So tune in for that, October 22nd and 23rd, LinkedIn or on the Tech Field Day website. Also, TechStrong TV. The following week, we hand back over to Mr. Foskett. Stephen will be also back out in California for AI Field Day. Sorry, AI Infrastructure is my event, and that's not until next year. AI Field Day will be in October 22nd. AI Field Day will be October 29th and 30th, and Stephen has another great collection of companies looking at the things that you can actually do with AI, maybe deliver some value to your organization. Something else that delivers value to your organization is the Tech Field Day Rundown and the news that we bring to you every week. You can catch new episodes of the Rundown every Wednesday on YouTube or in your favorite podcast application. Wherever you find us, please give us a like and maybe a nice review. You can also find us on TechStrong TV, as well as you can catch many of us, Tom and myself and Stephen, across TechStrong and Futuron Group programs. We will be back next Wednesday with all of the news that's fit to print, and some of it may involve AI. Until then, for myself, for Tom Hollingsworth, and from all of us here at the Tech Field Day family, here's wishing you and your family an awesome day.